Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I am naturopath Fiona Chin, co-author of The Kidney Disease Solution and part of the Kygenesis team. And I'm joined again today by my amazing friend, mentor and guide, Gregory Bellingham. I guess the best way to describe Greg is he's a spiritual mentor, guide. He's my spiritual mentor and guide. We have some really awesome conversations. He navigates me through what I would call the boggy, big, metaphysical questions that sometimes we have about life when you need to have that who am I, why am I here kind of conversation. Greg is who I go to have those. And if I'm in a big hole and throwing myself a pity party, he's often invited to drag me out of there. So he's really good at that. Greg is also an author. Can I say that you're an ex-minister? Do I say that one? Do you identify as that?
Yeah, a decade ago, yeah.
Yeah, and I say that because the conversation that we're going to have today, I reference that because I feel like he's quite well versed in probably having these conversations, because I guess that's something you were doing a lot when you were in the church world, right? That's the big sort of question.
Back in the day, very much so.
Yeah. Greg's also an author. He's written a great book called Hidden Faces of Change, which is sold out worldwide. And he just needs to get some more copies out. But it's a great book if anyone wants to really understand the process of change. For me, having gone through a lot of change this year, it's been a really great, I still go back to it. I've just got it ear flicked and there's some reference bits in there when I get a bit stuck that I'm like, oh, I need to reread that bit. So I found that really good. So I guess the topic that, I love just giving Greg the most easiest topics that I could possibly come up with. And it's one actually spirited on by one of my patients last week who asked me about, why do we get sick? What's that about? Why do some people that are healthy their whole lives and don't do all the stuff that we go, well, this will cause kidney disease. You've had diabetes and high blood pressure and you've been eating McDonald's and you're not eating so well, versus someone, and I put myself in this category, and I don't know whether you might put with what's going on with you. I definitely put my dad, who's just been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, into this category where we eat organic, we exercise, we meditate, we Wim Hof, we do all these amazing things, and we still get these big chronic diseases. And what's that about? How does that fit in the picture of the universe? And so not just why we get sick, and then can we use the law of attraction to will our way out of it and do that? Or is it more a surrender and the universe has a greater will than us, how much free choice we have? This big question that I thought we would just tackle today in a nice, easy, quick podcast.
Yeah, great. Let me give you my 3 points. No, I don't have 3 points. Big topic. Big topic, and not one that I'm necessarily ambivalent to. My middle daughter 4 weeks ago got diagnosed with ovarian cancer, which was knock you over with a feather kind of territory for us. She's only 24, so yeah, I mean, very, very real in the Bellingham household at the moment. Just the whole sickness vibe and what that means and how we're coping with that, and so not just an arbitrary kind of academic question for us at all. I guess I probably would start, and because there was a lot of specifics, there was a lot of kind of different avenues we could go down, but I think the avenue that I take myself down is just the avenue of sense making. Is that I'm, as a sense-making creature, there's this part of me, and or more particularly as a conscious individual, and all humans, arguably all things have a level of consciousness, but we certainly know that humans have a domain of consciousness, and with that domain of consciousness, there's this engagement, or there's this relationship with the events that take place. There's a relationship with the pain of suffering. There's a relationship with the news of a diagnosis, or the the implications of a treatment schedule, or the lingering relationship that you have as you go through abiding with a chronic illness, you know what I mean, living ongoingly day to day. There's this massive level of awareness with that, you know. It's something that you're both visceral, you're aware of it physically in terms of your senses, and you're aware of it viscerally in the core, in your gut, in your heart. It impacts that domain of you, and then you're also aware of it in the domain of your own soul, trying to wrestle with the implications, the day-to-day events that arise, you know. And then you're also in a relationship with it communally as it impacts the people around you. Mm-hmm. So there's all this. So there's a span of consciousness that kind of affects. If we look at consciousness as an experience of awareness, there's domains of awareness that are being impacted quite broadly through chronic illness or through chronic sickness. And then I kind of go, okay, well, what is happening for us when that's taking place, you know? And that's what I think is quite interesting, that there is this kind of idea, and it's been floated for a long time, and it was Sri Aurobindo was one of the first guys to talk about an evolution of human consciousness. It's picked up through spiral dynamics, a guy called Claire Graves. It was picked up by Donald Beck and Russell Cohen, I think, and then later on developed by the Integral Institute with guys like Ken Wilber. And more recently, there's just been a number of different people who keep engaging in this idea that there are levels of consciousness, that there's kind of an evolutionary dynamic to consciousness, different what Ken Wilber would call different structure stages of awareness. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good place to start, because we can try and answer a big hairy question like this, or we can try and give sense to a big hairy question like this. But if we don't attend to the fact that different people are at different structures, different levels of consciousness, right? And they're not, it's not a hierarchy as in if you're here, you're better. It's just, it's much like, say, Erickson, you know, or Piaget, who had kind of Piaget was an educational psychologist and a developmental psychologist, and they just talked about, you know, childhood development, academic development, cognitive development, you know, so they're called cognitive psychologists. And they just talked about how someone's cognition, how their thinking processes develop. And it's exactly the same here. So we're not trying to put a hierarchy and say up here is better than down here. It's just this is where everyone is at. And they start off with a really simple kind of schema, or a really simple way of understanding structures of consciousness, where they talk initially about the most popular, or the easiest one is archaic, magic, mythic, literal, mythic, rule role, rational, pluralistic, integral, paramind, metamind, supermind, overmind, you know, or overmind, supermind. I can't remember which. So it's really talking about a progressiveness of different structures, and with each different structure that I just mentioned, there's a worldview that goes with that. And so the reality is that when you're confronted with an illness, you're going to be, depending on where you are on that thingo, you're going to have a worldview, and that worldview is going to demand that you make sense of your situation in a particular way, right? Mm-hmm. And an answer that you might have at one level is going to be, maybe it's adequate for that level, but then as you evolve, that answer is going to become insufficient. Right?
Gotcha.
And so there's going to need to be this process of deconstructing the way that you thought about it, and then elevating, and then adopting. As you've moved into a different domain of awareness, a different domain of consciousness, you then adopt another worldview. And so there's a need in that new worldview to incorporate what you knew before. Otherwise, it causes some pain. But you want to incorporate what you knew before, but in a more, maybe in a more sophisticated or in a more comprehensive answer. So the first level that we talked about could be, say, archaic, and that's like when you're born, you're a baby. I mean, my mum tells me, well, she doesn't tell me anything now because she's got dementia. So she's more like the kid than me nowadays, but she's very cute. But she used to say, you were a colicky baby. You know what I mean? Well, I wouldn't have known about that. She said, you didn't stop crying for 5 months, you know what I mean, until the builder who was building the house came in and said, you need to get your baby up to this doctor and give him this, and this, whatever it was, right? Well, I was enmeshed in my world as a baby. There wasn't an emergent self putting his hand up going, hey, mum, I don't feel great. I'm unhappy. It was just a baby crying, and I wouldn't have known it was colic. I wouldn't have known why I was in pain or upset or cramping or windy or whatever it was, because I was just enmeshed, and so I suppose there's a lot of the world that's in that place. There's a lot of the world that, like a lot of animals, I imagine, would be in pain, and they don't have any other recourse other than this is their existence. You know what I mean? And that's kind of instructive in a way, because sometimes a lot of stuff just happens because we're enmeshed in creation. Good stuff, bad stuff. This is a non-moral space. This is a space where, my mum could have said, oh, it's really bad that my son has got colic as a baby, but reality was I wouldn't have put a moral tag on it because I wouldn't have known to. Good, right and wrong, good and bad, happy, unhappy, they were all concepts that hadn't actually emerged for me. So ascribing a label to my condition is like, if your pet gets hurt, we go, it's really bad. It's like a pet probably just goes, oh, well, it is what it is, right? They're not making a judgment about it.
No, they're not making it right or wrong, good or bad, it just is.
Yeah, so there's something unique. So that's instructive for us in a way, because there's something about humans that, as we get more sophisticated, as we evolve, we get to a point where we're going to start to ascribe labels to stuff. You know what I mean? And we're going to start to say, this isn't right. Okay, well, but this isn't right is a comparative statement. It's comparative to some sense that we have that there should be a... But, when you're on the African savannah and a lion is eating a gazelle, we don't ascribe a right and wrong to that. That's just how it rolls on the savannah, right?
Yeah.
So there's also something about our humanness that means at some point values and ethics and morals and judgments are going to kick in, but we don't start at that place. We start like everyone else, enmeshed.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just something worth observing, right? Because one of the things that happens is we go, what's wrong with the world that my daughter's got ovarian cancer? It's like, oh, dude, I don't know. That's an evolved brain has even thought of that question. Right? It's not, my cat wouldn't ask that question.
No, Polo's definitely not asking that. You should see he's stretched out on the couch having a wonderful time. Yes.
Yeah, so life just happens at that level, and life is just life. It's not there's no adjudication of right and wrong, good and bad, why me. There's no philosophy. It is just an evolving dynamic of nature, right? So that's kind of where we're born, but we sure as heck don't stay there, right?
You don't. And then there's the ascribing. So that's very much the surrender piece. Is that good or bad? Like, is it good to just be like, sometimes just this happens, like that gazelle got eaten by that lion and the other gazelle got away. Like, it's not right or wrong. That was part of the life cycle for that gazelle, and it is what it is. Same with the colicky baby. And I'm like, is that a good place? Or as we evolve, which I think you're about to tackle, do we make things harder for ourselves and more complicated because we're meaning makers? Or in that process, like, maybe I'll let you answer this, because I'm thinking almost the healing has to match the worldview in a sense too, doesn't it? Because that you're going to choose the healing modality dependent on your worldview and how whereabouts you are with all of that, right?
I think so. I think that's exactly what it's like, So So, for example, if we went up from so archaic is just this kind of primitive place where we're enmeshed in our world, right? Boom, there it is. The next stage up is magic, and the magic worldview is an egocentric worldview. So it's a magic structure or level of awareness, and it's egocentric. And it's so this is where there's a self, there's a sense of self which is emerging. Hence invoking the whole idea of ego. There is a Greg, there's a definite Greg emerging. And with that, there's the basic needs. There's a need for safety, there's a need for security, there's a need for all those basic fundamental ego-based needs, person-based needs kick in. Because the world is at this point, the difficulty about an emerging self is that the world is, and this is with your borderline psychology issues, is the world collapses in and someone doesn't have boundaries. So with the emergence of a self is the emergence of some of our earlier sense of boundaries. You know what I mean? So this is where we start to fashion things which are us versus me versus it, me versus them, mine. One of the first words that a baby says is no, mine. Can I have a look at your dolly? My dolly. It takes dolly back, and you're not allowed to have a look at dolly. Or that's my. Kids fighting over toys in a sandpit at preschool because they're at a really egocentric place, right? But a lot of people actually don't evolve much past that, and the world is still a big, scary, magical place, and there's bad stuff out there that's really threatening, and so this is easily the place of demons and monsters, and for kids obviously it's the monster outside or the monster under the bed, but that gets played out in adults who never move on to that, and the world remains this magical, scary place where stuff just happens, and it's really capricious, and it's really threatening, and there's no reason to it, and it's just. And so you can revert to a whole kind of, this is the domain of some shamanism. You know what I mean? It's like if I do this, if I say this incantation, if I do some sort of ritual, I'll keep the evil spirits away from me. So therefore, a chronic illness is not. A chronic illness could be, this is the devil. This is, in some levels of really unevolved Christian fundamentalism, this is a demonic attack, and you've got to bind and break it. You know what I mean? And every religion has some version of, almost all the major religions, whether it's going from Hinduism to Taoism to they all have a magic domain about them where life is transacted through a series of magical stuff, and some people have the magic and some people are subject to the magic. And so sometimes our illness can be interpreted in that space. That's hard to deal with because that's very hard to deal with in a modern world. Simply because that a lot of that magic perspective is going to be at conflict with science, but to the degree that finding an explanatory system that works for that individual creates a sense of coherence, then there'll be some of that will work. So you can judge it as really unevolved or a really low level. But to be honest with you, there's stories about when someone pointed the bone or someone said this, then the person in the tribe died because they fully believed that those words, that incantation, that ceremony, that prescription carried the power of life and death in it, and their consciousness adopted that and embraced that fully, and it had a physical outcome that resulted in that. So. There's something to be said for that. It's crazy stuff, but that's that level. Next level up from that is what is your mythic literal. So much institutional religion is still at the mythic literal space. It's at the mythic literal, the mythic rule role, and that's about a tribal centric worldview. So you've gone from being an individual and you've entered into a community of people. And all human communities are fashioned around a narrative. There'll be a story, there'll be a defining narrative that coalesces divergent people into a community unit, and that unit will have a story at the part of it. And that community will assign meaning to things like illness. You know what I mean? And they'll have their mythics, their big mythic stories will assign overriding concepts of to things like chronic illness or sickness or how to get healed, or this could be your karma, or this could be, like I said, an attack of the devil, or this could be this could be God's sovereign plan for your life, or you know what I mean. It could be, or this could be bad chi, or there's all that. There's all that sort of stuff, and that's okay. That's okay as well. And people will live in that magic mythic rule role space. And if they want to belong to that tribe, then part of being part of that tribe will be ownership of those beliefs, those values. That's going to be their worldview. The ethnocentric community is going to say this is how you should interpret what's happening to you. But it does that about everything. It does that about marriage. It does that about gender relationships. It does that about gender equity. It does that about roles in society. It does that about So it's not like it just prescribes. Whenever you're part of a tribal construct or an ethnic construct, there's a whole way in which that society or that community is organised, and you adopt that. In order to be part of that community, you download that. You know what I mean? That's what it is to be part of that community.
Yeah, I'm thinking how fascinating it is with that global tribal consciousness of how powerful that is on how you process great big concepts, because you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you've been brought up in that tribal way of thinking, or that collective consciousness where it is that, then it's very hard to think outside that unless you've had an experience of that. So you will stay at that level, and you'll look for treatments, and you almost can't operate outside of that, really, unless someone bridges that for you, or if you've got that curiosity. And so I'm just thinking how powerful that is, because, and then how these consciousnesses and these levels, which I'll let you keep going with, but just how prescriptive they are into someone's experience with disease. And so, I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, there's obviously religions where you're not allowed to have a blood transfusion. Famously, we lost Bob Marley because Rastafarians don't, amputate toes. Yeah. So he got cancer in his toe, and he's dead, because that is because he was going to stay within the construct of his ethnocentric, tribal-centric belief, right? Mm-hmm. There's a part of that where you will essentially stay in that. I mean, the thing about mythic literal and mythic rule is and the word mythic means that there's a big mythic, and myth is not to be understood as untruth. Myth is hypertruth, right? Mm-hmm. So when we call it a mythic space, we're not saying it's untrue. I always use the analogy, Greg and Ange were married, that's my wife and I. Greg and Ange were married on the 24th of September 1988, 33 years ago. That's a literal fact that most people would forget, right? Mm-hmm. If you say, when Greg and Ange got married, it was like strawberries and chocolate. It was like strawberries and ice cream. Mm-hmm. And it brings a smile. You go, yeah, I know what that's like. They taste great together. Those things should go together. That's cool. Now, I'm not a strawberry, and Angela's not ice cream, and so using that metaphor is kind of not literally true. Mm-hmm. It's mythically true, in so much as you assign strawberries and ice cream to Greg and Ange, right? Mm-hmm. What a mythic framework is lots of metaphors, lots of stories playing together to paint out higher truth. In the Western world, we think that myth is untruth, and it's not untruth at all. It's hypertruth. It's truth embedded in a tale, and you don't necessarily have to say this story is literally true, but you say this story is the bearer of profound and deep ultimate truths. Now, that's going to be a challenge to, say, a Christian fundamentalist who says, no, Jonah really was in the belly of an actual whale for 3 days. And then they'll pull out stories of people throughout history who've been swallowed by whales and came out, or, you know, every single animal was on Noah's Ark. Every insect was, and then at the end of it, when it landed on Mount Ararat, all the llamas went to Peru, all the polar bears went to the North Pole, all the kangaroos hopped on down to Australia. And you go, okay, cool. If that's where you're at, that's where you're at. But there's, you know, some of these stories that we were told at Sunday school when we were kids, people will download them as literal, and that's what we mean by mythic literal.
Gotcha.
And that's really important because it's the first place we start belonging, right? If you believe this, then you're a Christian. If you believe this, then you're a good Hindu. You know, they're real. You know, this really did happen. You know, if you believe this, you're a good Buddhist. Or Buddhism's probably an exception because it's more a philosophy of mind than it is a religious belief. But Buddhism within the Oriental cultures got deeply embedded with ancestral worship. You know what I mean? The honouring of the ancestors. So there's all of that. So there's the mythic literal domain where you will interpret your illness through a mythic literal framework. And that will definitely impact the way you see your world, and you'll definitely give you an interpretive framework as to what is happening with you. And so I've had friends with, so a lot of our Christian friends will say, we're really going to pray for your daughter. We're going to fast. We're going to call down the power of God, you know. And I love that. I just go, thank you. Like any energy flowing our way, bring it on. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's coming out of a really sincere world. It's coming out of a really sincere belief that has a worldview, a structure of awareness that has a particular worldview. I'm not cynical about it. I'm just saying that's where it's at. Mythic literal, mythic rule role. But a lot of the time that won't work for people, right? A lot of the time people will get to a point where it's like, this isn't working for me. And so the next level above that you would broadly call a rational level, right? And I think people move into this domain of rationality when, for whatever reason, the tribe or the ethnocentric group that they're part of ceases being a comfort to them. Becomes restrictive and painful. I know that from my own Christian heritage. You know, the church became just too hard to. I didn't believe in hell. I didn't believe in a bunch of stuff that everyone. And I was the pastor of a church, so it's like, if you're the captain of the ship and you don't believe some of our story, dude, you know, like, you need to surrender the captaincy. Like, the ship's not going down with you, brother. So I did. You know, in all sincerity, you can't stay a leader of a community if, for whatever reason, those stories that you're telling yourself at that level are not working for you. And they weren't working for me. So I was like, I can't do this anymore. And that was the first time that I'm not thinking about the tribe. I'm not thinking about that community. I'm looking at these stories going, this does not work. I mean, for me, it was really simple. When my kids brought their friends home from school when they were young, if I believed that people were going to go to hell, then I would have had to have been the dad that said to all my kids' friends, have you asked Jesus into your life? Because if you haven't, you're going to go to hell. I just didn't want to be that dad. Yeah. It seemed like a version of kind of psychological abuse for poor little kids that were going to turn up on my front door. And I didn't want other parents saying, you can't go to Greg and Angie's place because they're going to terrify my kids with stories of hell, right? Yeah. So I kind of abandoned the tribal story about heaven and hell because it wasn't working for me raising my kids. You know, I wish there was a more sophisticated version of that, but there's not. And I think that's the way a lot of time people move out of communities. They move out of dead marriages. They move out of community groups. They move out of jobs. They move out of employment. They move out of these systems. Like the whole corporate world is a form of tribe. If you're a lawyer, there's the lawyer tribe. If you're an accountant or the KP, if you work for PricewaterhouseCoopers, there's the PwC tribe, you know. And sometimes people just get to a point where they go, I'm done. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so that is called a rational level. And of course, the worldview that goes with rationalism is the modern science worldview is going to go really well with that. So your disease is going to be interpreted at that level as cell disorders, and it's going to be about the pathology, and it's going to be about the doctors, and it's going to be about the percentages in terms of prognosis outcomes of people 5 years after who's got this condition, how many do this, how many do that, what stage it's at, what level it's at, you know, what your blood is presenting, what your scans say, what you can expect given precedent. And that is going to become, and for many people like that, there's not much difference sometimes between a specialist coming out and saying, well, you're at this level and the prognosis looks like this, to the shaman who points the bone and goes, you'll be dead in 3 days.
Absolutely. No placebo effects. Same.
100%. Yeah. Or if you take this drug, it means this, or if you take that drug, it means that. And so, but that's the you know, and you could say that a lot of us who enter into the medical space, that's the world that we get confronted with first off. And you know, let's be honest, that space has healed a hell of a lot of people and made extraordinary progressions in terms of people's well-being. I'm so grateful for the professors and the doctors who are looking after my daughter. You know, they are amazing in what they do. But they're functioning at a really rational level. You know, dealing with what they see from what they're dealing with what they can observe. But you know, the limitation in that is that a lot of what's going on is not observable.
Yes, that's it, isn't it? And I guess this is where a lot of our kidney coach tribe are going to sit, because they might be bridging into the next one where this is what the kidneys do, that you have to have dialysis, you know, and you know, I'm listening to, and maybe we'll have this conversation at the end. It's very hard to transcend your beliefs outside of what level you're at, because there's such a strong prescription into believing that whatever's prescribed to you at that same level, you're going to take and swallow as a pill without questioning, because that's where your mind is at. So to to say, okay, I'm at a rational level, but we're all one and connected to the multiverse, and that you have the power to heal if you, I don't know, surrender into God and go into the quantum in an instant, is very hard for someone when they're sitting in the rational space to go, well, I'm going to take that pill because that's not where my mind is at. So I can't prescribe to that because I'm prescribing to this, which is the rational science world.
Yeah, and so I think the point in all of this is the point in kind of observing these different levels of these different structures of consciousness is to suggest that when we're dealing with the question of like, why me, or what is this sickness about? There's multiple answers that are applicable at different levels, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And depending on where you sit, and you might say, I don't even know where I sit on that sliding scale of awareness, right? Depending where you sit is where you're gonna want to find meaning. You know what I mean? And so there's not just, and because we're sense-making creatures that are looking for meaning, there's not just one meaning for what we're going through.
Yeah.
You know, that's the truth of it. You know, for one person, it's like, I just need everyone to pray. Okay, cool. All right, let's all pray. For another person, it's like, I need to see another specialist. I need to get a scan. I need to get another blood test. Okay, then that's what it is. You know what I mean? For other people, they go, I need to have a fully organic diet, and because their tribe is the natural therapies world, and so for them, it's like, okay, I'm going all organic. I'm buying that juicer, I'm having beetroot, and now I'm having, you know what I mean? It's like, and I'm importing this and that, and it's like, there it is, boom, yeah, right, rock on. And that's totally, I'm totally for that. You know, the point that I would make is that you source meaning you have to source meaning for your life where you're at. You know what I mean? Like you can't be prescribed. I can't go to someone who's part of a tribe and they really believe a particular thing. I'm going to do damage to them if I go in them and tell them that they have to believe something about their condition that they're not in a place to believe that.
Yeah.
If I go into someone who believes that this is this is their karma, and I go, it's got nothing to do with karma. Oh, this is my karmic curriculum for this life. I go, okay. I might, if I come from a different tribe, I might say, no, it's God's sovereignty. And you go, well, what kind of capricious, weird God gives someone a chronic illness? Like, how do I make sense of that? So at any level, any answer that we source to the reasons for suffering are going to be grossly inadequate for some people, and but for others, they're going to be, this is the truth. Yeah. And so at this point, truth is very subjective.
So what comes after rational? We're starting to head into the
probably pluralistic, and pluralistic is probably where you because the worldview of rationalism is being an individual, and anyone who's been an individual long enough knows that my individuality is great, but I'd love to do life with some other people other than me. Yeah. Like the world has to be bigger than me and my aspirations. I'd like a partner, or I'd like a family, or I do want to belong to some people. And so that's where you enter into a pluralistic worldview. And that's probably the first worldview that starts to say, there are people out there that are different from me, but they belong. Right? And so we make room for the other. There are people who are in different tribes. So, that's obviously something that me, coming out of relatively evangelical Christian fundamentalism, being very parochial and strong about that, get to a pluralistic level and I go, wow, I mean, half the world is, 2/3 of the world aren't my religion. Truckloads of the world are secular humanists. Truckloads of the world are Taoists, are Hindus, are Muslim, are Jewish. Even within my tribe of Christendom, it's such a divided tribe anyway. Some are Catholics, some are conservative Presbyterian. So you just wake up to the fact that the world is multiple ethnocentric, multiple tribal centric, and that if you're going to sort of appeal to any kind of nationalism or kind of tribal superiority, then really what you're going to do is isolate yourself on a very small island, a very ignorant island, and that opening up to the multiverse of people is actually really healthy for you. And if you isolate yourself purely at the level of the rational in your own little space, and it's all about me, that's going to become an extraordinarily small world. You're almost better off being in a tribe than just being on about your own power, your own wealth, your own position, your own well-being, your own comfort. That the whole secular modernist pursuit of growth and a lot of the growth industry around your own self-fulfillment is going to make people sick, because it's going to isolate people in their individuality. What's my purpose? Really? You want to find out what your purpose is? I mean, that's an extraordinarily narrow view. You're part of an extraordinary ecosystem. And you think your well-being is tied to you being significant and having a purpose that everyone else recognizes. It's a very utilitarian way to look at your life. What can I produce? What do I produce, and how do I extract the most value from that? Okay, good luck with that. You're going to have an unhappy life, but swing away. And pluralism is a step out of that. It's a step into an inclusive. It's the first kind of inclusivity. It's Beck and Cohen also call it the mean green meme, because it's green in terms of its lush inclusivity, but pluralists don't tend to include people that are not pluralist. So your environmentalist loves everyone except people that chop down trees and mine fossil fuels.
Vegans are the same.
Vegans love everyone, but if you eat meat, you probably are a bastard. You know, it's like
Yeah, exactly. And then they wish that, you know, it's this, you know, I was having this discussion with a friend, you know, people that are say hardcore vegan and anti-hunting, and then they say, well, that person should die, and I'm like, hang on, you're prescribing the same thing that you're anti to something just because it doesn't fit within your box. So they're, you know, you're vegan and then you want to kill the person that's hunted that animal. Aren't you now operating at exactly the same level?
100%.
So, yeah.
I used to live in Bellingham, which was a real hippie town, you know, and everyone was pro the environment and anti-logging, and I never went into one of those people's places where they didn't have the most stunning wooden floors, and you just go, dude, how did you source your house? You know, like
is that a plastic tree on your floor?
Is this sustainable forestry or what? You know, so there's that kind of in the pluralistic space. There is that kind of short-sighted. It's inclusive to a point.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's probably the difference between that and the next stage, which they broadly could call integral. And for me, that is an inclusive space, but it's the first space that I think you include suffering. You start to see that everything belongs, that the world is this complex ecosystem, but within this complex ecosystem, there's also stuff that hurts. You know, and that whilst I might ascribe in my tribal mindset, or my individual mindset, or my pluralistic mindset, I might have ascribed a morality to different things, that there are things out there that are going to hurt me, and that's actually part of being alive. You know, that there are people that I won't get along with, that there are people who probably listen to this who go, that guy is just a nutter, or so not everyone will agree, or not everyone will like you, or not everyone will approve of you. Some people will really dislike you intensely, and that there's some things in life that are just going to cause great pain, of which sickness is one. You know? And you say, well, what do you mean by that? And I just go, well, you know, go into any ecosystem. You know, I always make the reference to mistletoe. It's one of the most common things in the Australian bush, but it's a parasite that eats gum trees.
Yeah.
And you just go, well, you can say, well, it doesn't belong. Well, I know, but it's there, right? It's there. You know, it's like species that were introduced to Australia, and you go, those species are ravishing the cane toads. They don't belong. I know, but they're there now, right?
Yeah.
So somehow they got here. So the advent of the cane toad is over. It's here, and it's had its impact, and it's caused extraordinary devastation to the way that it was, the natural way that it was. And so now we have another way that it was, and that's our life, right? That's also a metaphor for. It's not a metaphor. That's a very sober awakening that some stuff is going to happen. Now, what's most interesting about that is that there's an energy within the human consciousness that says, I'm going to stand in opposition to this. This isn't right. Now, that energy is not just the ascribing of an ethic or a value. That energy is an energy that says, this thing that is opposing me or diminishing me or depleting me, I reject it, I repudiate it, I don't like it, I don't want it. Now, is that suggestive that the normal state, the normative, and this is what Sri Aurobindo would say, the normative state is one of bliss.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's one of bliss, because most of what we experience is health and wellness and life and deep connection, we only ever notice that we're not experiencing those things when something opposes us, when a suffering enters in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when a suffering enters in, there's this almost reflexive energy in us that goes, I hate this. This isn't right. I got to get rid of this. this is abnormal, something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So this integral level is, the ones above that, power and meta mind is starting to download a worldview that says, oh, wow, there's a lot going on here. And maybe the overall stasis of everything, maybe the situation of everything is actually one of bliss. And I'm only ever really aware of my bliss when I'm experiencing something that isn't bliss.
Mm-hmm.
So then you say, well, it doesn't seem very fair. Well, probably not, but I have a feeling that almost every life is going to experience something that's not bliss, right? This is where Richard Rohr says, the two great transformative elements in human life is great suffering and great love.
I can confirm.
Is that helpful? It's probably not helpful in the moment, but you combine that with what, say, Aurobindo is saying about the natural stasis of thing is one of bliss. It's probably helping us to say, wow, there is a lot of wonder and beauty. There is a lot of majesty, and life is amazing. I mean, this is where I love a guy like Ricky Gervais. He just goes, this whole thing he's an atheist, but he's an atheist with such a healthy perspective, because he goes, this whole thing is wonderful. And then he brings out Netflix's story, the Afterlife thing, which is about him losing his spouse to cancer. And it's his deep dive into the suffering and the angst and the depression and the suicidal tendencies of someone who's lost someone so close to them. And so, but he does that not just to be comedic, he does that to paint that there is something extraordinarily beautiful in this deep dive. Maybe an analogy you could play at this level too would be like, computers were created to, I think the personal computer was created to be an asset, to be a resource, to be something that made our life simpler, right? And then some horrible twat created a virus. Like, why? Like, and you think of every time there's been a technological computer innovation, someone has gone and got a virus for it, right? Well, why have you done that? And then you ask the question, have viruses destroyed technology, or have they actually been a source of making technology infinitely more robust, infinitely more reliable, infinitely more secure? Mm-hmm. You go, yeah, well, the introduction of the negative or the counterpoint actually is only really enriched and made the thing itself. And so this is where a guy like Aurobindo would say that pain or suffering is just perfection circling itself, testing itself.
Yeah, you and I had that conversation before. Yeah, it's unfolding in. That was that thing you sent me. It's unfolding in on itself.
Yeah, and so you can now, if you're not at an integral level, this whole conversation is you're going to have tapped out and gone, clearly this guy doesn't know anything about chronic illness. All right, yeah. I'm happy for you to say that. But maybe you're deep into your chronic illness, and you go, you know what, my life still is beautiful.
Yeah,
my life is still wonderful. That what has been pulled out of me through my illness has been incredible resolve, incredible intimacy, incredible fortitude. What's been pulled out of me is depths that I just didn't even know that I had. Mm-hmm. Resourcefulness that I just never had. What I've experienced from people is depths of love and concern and care, and valuing me in a way that I've never valued myself that way until someone loved me like that. Mm-hmm. Despite my condition, these people loved me. I know over the last 4 weeks since Lydia's condition, the outpouring of love and affection and support for us has just been unbelievable. Like if we were sitting here in our little house in Sydney thinking no one loves us, I mean, we could not sustain that thesis, because the love that has been shared by, and one person of note has been my grandmother, who's a fundamentalist. My mother-in-law, who's a fundamentalist Christian, and she. I was walking on the beach with my wife this morning and just going, Jilly has just been so incredibly supportive in totally a Christian-centric, pray for you, fast, believe, call all my friends to pray. And you go, okay, well, I'm not there in terms of all of that, but her love for us is unequivocal, and so at the integral level, you start to see this awful stuff that's happening is somehow also producing something really profound, that you may not have seen if you just may not have seen it. And I'm not going to say may not have seen if this did not happen, because someone will say, well, maybe I would have preferred not to see it if this didn't happen. This is not a justification for why someone's sick. This is another worldview, at another perspective, another level of consciousness. And some of these levels of awareness become what's called transrational. Do you know what I mean? So we're not just talking about stuff that makes sense in the head. We're talking about stuff that you feel in your heart, that you intuit. Mm-hmm. You intuit through a sense, as opposed to, I work this out in my head. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's briefly some of the maybe some of the way that I would play with this stuff.
Yeah. And are there levels above where we're at?
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. Yeah. There's meta mind. I think it's meta and para. Yeah. Oh no, it's para. I think it's para mind, meta mind, and I think para mind is where you start to sense wholes, holistic things as a thing. You start to see the unity. So it's not just the inclusion of the things that hurt and are painful. You start to see how that's all part of a bigger oneness. Then the one above that, which I think is meta mind, is you start to feel that oneness. Mm-hmm. You don't just see it. You start to go, oh my gosh, this whole thing is conspiring in a particular way. And then the next one above that, I think, is almost is almost a universal awareness that you are, like, the reality is that humans are part of the universe. We didn't come from another planet. The fact that we can reflect about ourselves, our situation, our planet, our environment, one another, is really the universe reflecting on itself. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's as close as that kind of level is as close as we're going to get to a divine mind. A product of something extraordinary that has the capacity. Because one of the things that humans do is we always tend to stand outside of the environment. We look at the environment as over there, and we need to make some decisions about fossil fuels and renewables. Mm-hmm. Shall we commit to carbon neutral by 2050? If you're in the Nationals, good on you. That's a perspective. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. The greater perspective is like, we're on this planet and we're an element of the planet that's heating the planet up potentially, right? And we're not independent from that. There's not another planet to go to. Like we can't zip off somewhere else. We're subject to this space, mm-hmm. and so we're part of this. I think this was the awareness that astronauts had when they beamed off the Earth, and they look back and go, oh my gosh.
Yeah, there's a name for it. I can't remember. It's like the unity consciousness or whatever, where they look back and they don't see, exactly like you say, they don't see us as all separate. They suddenly realize that we are all together on one planet, and we're all part of this. We're all part of the ecosystem, and we're all just as important with all our variables and differences because we're part of this ecosystem.
Yeah. And no one's going anywhere, and energy is never destroyed. It's just diffused and reabsorbed into a different space. And so, we can then start to have bigger conversations at this level. We can have bigger conversations about the myth of individuality, the myth of self. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that really to talk about the individuality of an ant in the universe. You just go, really? Okay. We don't give ants any individuality at all.
No.
And yet on a universal scale, we're not much bigger than an ant.
Mm-mm.
And so to fixate about our individuality starts to become comical in a way. At that universal mindset, it's like, really?
Yeah.
It's really important to me. It's really important to me. But at a unity consciousness or at a greater universal awareness, it's enfolded into something infinitely bigger. You know, I can't profess to know much about that. I just know that being orientated towards that awareness means when we talk about things like surrendering in suffering,
Mm-hmm.
that's easier to do, because there's kind of an arrow of time between my past, my future, and my present. And in the arrow of time, it all kind of condenses into it. It is what it is, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
you know, I had suffering in the past through different things. It did impact me, but I've moved on from that. I'll probably have suffering in the future, and there's things that upset me now, but they all coalesce into a singularity. They all coalesce into a series of experiences that are creating something, creating the phenomena of my life, creating the phenomena of your life. And that is going to be what it's going to be, right?
Yeah. So I circle back to the why we get disease, and I guess, like you say, it's, did the witch or the shaman point the bone? Have you been a bad Christian? Are you going to hell? Is this part of your karma? Do you just have bad genes if we're on the rational level and you haven't eaten quite well? And as we go up, is it like, is there a deeper meaning, or is it part of your spiritual growth to go through something a bit like the coal goes through the pressure and comes out as a diamond, like, is that part of your evolution and growth? And I guess you can't answer that, or there is no one answer for that, because it will just depend on where your mind is at to be able to process that on the level that you're at. Is there a universal truth behind dis-ease and why it manifests, or is there no such thing, because it really is, there are multiple truths?
Well, I think I don't know, but at the level I'm at, it belongs, right? And you could easily ask the question, why didn't you?
Yeah. Well, it's the same question, isn't it? Like, why didn't you? It's exactly the same question, but we never ask that. And I'm always curious about that. Well, why didn't you manifest a disease? And on top of that, it's back to what you said in that dualistic point right at the beginning. We've labeled dis-ease as bad. Imagine if we didn't have that label. Imagine if disease wasn't bad, if it was this beautiful opportunity for growth and to deeper connect with yourself and those around you, if we had a whole different narrative around it. But we don't. So disease is seen as bad because for whatever reason we've got a fear of pain, suffering, and of death. And so it gets thrown in the bad category. So
very much so. And that's probably because we live in a culture that is extraordinarily disconnected from nature.
Oh, like, my goodness.
In nature, suffering and death it's a given.
Yes. Yeah.
You only have to sit in the bush and sit in the forest and look at bird life competing with one another, or just see how life emerges through the death of something. This was always Rob Bell's point. You pick the tomato off the vine. The moment you pick it, that tomato is dying. Mm-hmm. But you ingest it and you get life. Mm-hmm. And Joseph Campbell was really good at sort of saying primitive man, because of his enmeshment, or her, because of their enmeshment in the native world, they understood that the cradle of life was death. That death was the place where life emerged. You put a seed in the ground, unless there's a grain of, in scripture, the Hebrew text, unless a grain of seed falls to the ground, it will not bear fruit. Unless it falls to the ground and die, it will not crack open, it'll bear no fruit. And so there's this elemental understanding that death equals life, whereas for the modern man, death equals an end. And normally what it equals is it's death to me, death to self. Mm-hmm.
Yes,
and which
the
is
individual self.
which is death to ego, right?
Yes, yeah,
In
exactly.
the kind of in the Eastern tradition, Hinduism and Buddhism, death of self is actually realization of the singularity of the one.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's the death of the Atman is the realization of Brahman. You know, but in but you know, the Platonic dualism gave us the dualities, and so you know the West and the modern West has interpreted death as the end of myself, the end of my individuality, the end of my life, the end of my existence, not as a cradle to another thing, you know. And this is where conversations about consciousness become really, really powerful because the modern Western mind says that consciousness only appears at the time of the emergence of matter. So when a baby is born, it becomes a conscious creature.
Mm-hmm.
And so so what the modern mind does is it says consciousness is tied to the emergence of the physical. So we think at the demise of the physical, when the physical dies, the consciousness evaporates or consciousness ceases to exist. But the Eastern tradition is going to encourage us to say consciousness is inherent. And so they'll ask a question like, show me the face that you had before you were born, which is to suggest you always existed. Your consciousness always existed.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's doing time in this avatar called Greg in this physicality.
Mm-hmm.
You know that or the fee physicality,
Mm-hmm.
and then when that physicality drops, your consciousness will no sooner cease to exist, but it'll continue. It always was, it is, and it will continue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that what happens in between that continuum is what we call reincarnation or resurrection. You know,
Yeah.
if you're a Christian, you call it resurrection. If you're Eastern tradition, you call it reincarnation. But or you can have a cold material perspective and say consciousness only exists in the material, and when the material dies, so does your consciousness. And I hope you enjoyed the game because the game is over.
Yeah.
I don't really care where you play, but it is a beautiful thing to think that it is a beautiful thing to reinterpret our individuality in light of um, a different interpretation of life and death.
Well, I think that's the big issue that we have on the planet at the moment with everything going on in 2021 is we're so frightened of death. And so we respond out of that mind, right? Whereas if you have a different interpretation of it, I subscribe to the reincarnation resurrection part. And so I go, I'm going to be stuck with me for the rest of my life. At lives forever, even when this meat suit drops away, I'm still stuck with me. So I can get and understand the perceived suffering in this lifetime of having a chronic disease. Or I can be grateful for it and work through it. And I will transform that and not have to take that into next time I go, and I get to grow from it. And this is just temporary. Whatever I'm going through at the moment is temporary. It'll drop away. And that I'm not a body, I'm greater than that. And so it's just part of the experience that this avatar called Fiona has in this lifetime. And who knows what that's a stepping stone to by processing and going through it for whatever's beyond the veil. We just don't know. We can't even pretend to know. You know, no one knows what happens after death. We're silly if we think we do know that. So, yeah.
And I think the other thing is that the modern mind wants to have a utility around that. What is the purpose of this?
Yes, that's how we think. Like there must be a reason.
Why do we ask that question all the time?
Purpose. I don't know. I do. Like, what's the purpose of MS? I think that all the time. Like, what is this? And we're meaning makers, and that's how we function. And we have to, having meaning makes us feel safe and gives us parameters to operate. But I've not found the meaning, and so.
No, and it's a real challenge, I think, in terms of our formation, in terms of consciousness or spirituality, is to go that question around purpose and utility, because purpose is about function and utility, right?
Mm-hmm.
At different times, humans have had different, what you would call epistemologies, ways of knowing what they know. Right? And one of the ways that we know what we know now is we talk about it from the perspective of utility. What's the purpose? What's your purpose? Simon Sinek, know the why behind the what.
Yeah.
If I lived in a primitive tribe, that's not a question I'm going to ask. You know what I mean? If I was a Roman centurion, then the epistemology is, if I was a Greek, a Greek politician on the mountain, on Mars Hill debating, the purpose was the politic. It was about philosophy. The philosopher was the highest stage, and thinking and reason, and but then if I was another person so it's not like, it just seems to me that the modern mind is fixated with this idea of, I must have a purpose, it must be significant, it must make a contribution, I must be able to put a value on it.
Yeah, it's rife in my generation, the generations behind me, with people being influencers and things like that. It's rife at the moment, and it's in that PD world, and even some people that I think might have been beyond that consciousness. It's like, find your purpose and you'll never suffer. And I'm like, well, the best thing I ever did was drop that story, because the drive to find my purpose and monetize it and do that is what I think contributed to chronic disease. The moment that I dropped a drive to having to have a purpose other than just being fee, it's the best thing I've ever, and I can say that the best thing I ever did in my life was drop looking for a meaning of who I am outside myself, of just being fee's fee. There is no greater meaning in my life than that. And however I express that, be it kidney coach or having a conversation with you and leaving up these podcasts or seeing my patients, that's not about having a purpose. That's just I'm my best version when I'm just me, without all of that wrapping around it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think I'm very much in that place as well. And and when I'm in that place, I'm aware that I am a product of the antithetical stuff as much as I am the good stuff. The stuff that has wounded me has shaped me. The people that have hurt me and disappointed me the most have been as influential as the people who've been lovely to me. The stuff that I have not been able to conquer and dominate, which is a lot, has been really, really some of the most beautiful stuff ever. And that's taught me how to do relationships, for example, non-coercive, non-controlling relationships.
Yes, yeah.
But I'm not, because I can't control everything, So some of this, so then you get to a point where some of this sort of stuff is like, it doesn't have a purpose, but when you replay the tape, you go, oh, it contributed. It contributed. Yeah. It's part of the tapestry, right? Hence
it all belongs.
It all belongs, right? It all belongs. I wouldn't have picked it. I would have just picked the narrative where I was the winner, I was loved, I was affirmed, I was rewarded.
Yeah.
And then I'd just be a stone cold narcissist, that would have led to a highly toxic individual, not a particularly awakened, realized one. And I mean, just have a look at our planet. There's people who are in that space, right? And one of the reasons why they're in that space is because they've departmentalized their world and gone, I am not going to be aware of the other. I'm going to stay in my tribe. I'm going to stay in my nationality. It's going to be America first. And it's it's like, hey, wakey, America's on a planet called the Earth. There's more than one nation. Just have a look at the number of nations that filed in at the Olympics. You might have been the biggest team. You weren't the only team.
Yeah.
No offense to any Americans, love you all, but it's like that kind of narrowness always burns us. So that's why I embrace the integral. I don't embrace the integral because I like suffering. I embrace the inclusion of integral mindset, because you just go, yeah, it just belongs.
And is that then the answer with why do we get chronic diseases? There is no answer apart from the fact that it belongs. Otherwise, it can't not belong.
I think that's a good enough answer at one level, because it says that fee is fee, and Fiona is not going to be Fiona. Like the Fiona that we're talking to now, who's interested in these things, has evolved because she's had a chronic illness.
Yeah.
And if she hadn't had a chronic illness, maybe we're not having this conversation. And the Greg who's having this conversation is having this conversation equally in part because of the good things that have shaped him, but also in part because of all the ways in which he's been disappointed, let down, and failed in his life. So this goes into the success failure conversation. You know, it's the inclusion of the other, the opposite, the detractor, the computer virus circling this wonderful invention. You know,
and then I go, so, you know, on that really high level of thinking, then when we're talking about that beautiful quote that you talked to me after we caught up last time, which was about, you know, imperfection or suffering, whatever it was, is perfection folding in on itself.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing in this. I mean, my philosophy is we are all God, the universe, whatever you want to call that, expressing itself in different forms so it can get to know itself. It has to have part of anything that you can dream up and put into consciousness, it has to experience. So someone that, you know, was an elite athlete and super healthy and everything, developing MS, is part of a potential in the field that happens to be picked up and embodied by me. And so the universe is experiencing itself through that situation, through me, so it better gets to know itself. So it has to belong. It's part of the perfection, as you talk about, of the universe folding in on itself. And so in some ways, the universe or God or whatever you call that meta consciousness doesn't look down and go, Fiona's diseased and imperfect. It goes, she's perfect because she's experiencing a reality that it couldn't experience or be otherwise, and it belongs.
I think so. And even the part of Fiona that says, I hate this, this is awful, that even the utterly subjective moment where there's this great despair is in a way a declaration of the greater bliss.
Yeah. Yep.
It's you saying, this whole thing normatively is better than this. So why am I experiencing this? You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's a really weird thought, but it's true. It's like the fact that we're incredulous about our suffering, the fact that we reject it, is because deep down we know that, you know, hey, it should be better. It can be better than this, right? It's normally more perfect than this. It's normally more wonderful than this. It's normally more glorious than this. So why am I experiencing this? Which again, paradoxically, orientates us around completion and beauty and perfection and stuff that's beautiful. But it does it through the antithetical element, not just through the affirmative thing. It doesn't just hold up the perfect. It holds up what's not perfect, and we enter into a relationship with what's not perfect with an energy or a drive to improve it, to fix it, to get healed from it, to end that thing that isn't right, you know. And you know, we're having this at a really philosophical level, but when my daughter got diagnosed, the amount of energy that immediately kicked in for her well-being, like, it was on. Yeah. Like all the energy was flowing. Let's, you know, family circle. Okay, everyone has a right to feel how they want to feel. If you feel down and angry, be down and angry. There's going to be no judgment in this house. This is just going to be a free place for you to do whatever you need to do. So it's super, you know, the family switches on. Boom, we're on. We're on to allow people to be where they're at. So all this kind of, you know, and then friends dialing in, we're here for you, we've got your back, we love you, sending love, sending positive, like, and so this thing, which is, you know, ovarian cancer, it doesn't really get much more ugly than that. You know, the rational prognosis isn't wonderful, just look it up. And yet the positive energy, not just the positive energy, but the energy that says, okay, we're on. It's just brought out the best in everyone, you know.
Yeah.
It's
So then you go
incredible.
on, yeah, and then on a bigger scale, you'd say, how can that diagnosis then be bad or put in that bad category when it's brought out so much good?
I know. So it becomes, so this is where the virus becomes, you know, the computer analogy it's a trivial analogy, and for anyone with chronic illness, please forgive me, but it does highlight that things that were meant to be malicious and to bring degradation and brokenness actually circle around to bring greater robustness, greater strength, greater health, greater well-being, greater all this sort of stuff. You know what I mean? And I think, yeah, that's a very human thing, that the orientation is towards, and I use the word that Aurobindo uses, bliss. And Joseph Campbell uses that. You know, the orientation is towards bliss, towards a beautiful state. And so when the antithetical thing, when the thing that isn't beautiful enters in, it kicks into gear something inside of us that says, oh no, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get healed from this. And if I can't get healed, I'm going to fight this. I mean, I hate that language. I do hate the language of fight, mainly as a dad, because I can't really get inside my daughter's body and beat up a cancer cell. You know what I mean? So it's useless language. But the intent is I'm gonna oppose the antithetical, because I actually am orientated towards something that's beautiful and higher and better. So even in that regard, illness is serving progression. Chronic illness is serving an instinct inside of us towards wellness.
Yes.
I love all that. I don't know if that helps anyone, but it helps me.
Yeah.
It's helping me in this season.
And it, you know, I know people with a chronic disease will sit there and go, well, you know, we've got kidney failure that will lead to death and transplant and dialysis. And well, I get that. And I go, guess what, though, we all die. And yeah, you know, someone might go out and get hit by a car one day, and then other people have cancer or a different type of roadmap where their destination might be, a doctor can say it looks like this. Is one better than the other? I don't know. You know, I don't know. Like, I'm on the chronic disease route. Would I rather go out and get hit by a car one day? The rate that I walk, that's also just as likely to happen. But crossing a major Melbourne road with trams, I nearly got hit yesterday. So I'm like, is one better than the other? I don't know. That's just something that as an individual we ascribe to. I mean, death, that's one certainty we all have, is we're all going to die in this lifetime, and what that looks like is up to us. I think all you can do in between is live the best life that you can, and maybe taking some of these concepts and going, okay, well, I have got chronic kidney disease, or maybe I'm watching this and I've got ovarian cancer, and my dad with multiple myeloma, or me with MS, and I go, you may not be given a choice around that and how the universe has decided to get to know itself and express itself through the body that is you, but you do have a choice about how you live in those moments day to day. And so for you with your daughter Lydia, it's not being angry at the world and wanting to punch it all up. I'm sure there's elements of that, but there's the gratitude and the gratefulness and the connectedness that you've gotten out of it. For me with MS, yeah, there's days that I want to scream because I can't ride my horses, and I can't trek, and I can't just take my dog for a walk. All of those things are goddamn frustrating, excuse my language. But the other side of that is, you know, it brings out people that, you know, are really ready to help and care, and sometimes it comes from the most surprising people. And it's shown me my resilience and strength and all of those things that sometimes I just go, oh, that's boring. We're great, I'm resilient and super strong, woo! But there's stuff in there to be grateful for. And I go, if I was to really be honest, would I change it? Yeah, there's definitely moments where I'm like, yeah, I would give this thing away in an instant, but then I wouldn't be me, and I wouldn't be able to have this conversation. And yeah. I know I wouldn't be as an effective naturopath, because when patients sit in front of me, I may not get exactly where they're at, but I get it. And I think I shared this to you right at the beginning. You know, I went up to my dad on Saturday and I was laughing because I realized what a product of my parents I am. My mum deals with it by being busy, and my dad is super stoic. You know, he's in pain. I think it's, you know, his whole face is contorted. And, I was able to sit down, and he's like, I'll be okay. I've had a good life. I'm lucky to be alive. I've ridden motorbikes all my life. He was a really great rock climber. And he's like, I've had boulders flying past me. I should be dead. I said, yeah, but you're not, and you're experiencing this right now. So actually, how are you? And he burst into tears. And that's not my dad. He is super stoic, but he was able to do that because I was able to prescribe that space for him because of everything I've been through. Maybe that's the whole purpose of it, to help my dad's transition to be more authentic and him not being so disconnected and stoic. And then I go, is it worth it? Shit, yes, it's worth it. If it's worth it that I can just help my dad through this because I can sit and hold space for him because of what I've been through, totally worth it.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, right? And I concur with all of that. I think that the more that we can evolve and embrace all of this stuff, the whole thing,
Yeah.
not just we don't get to cherry pick and choose what we get and what we don't get. We
I
just
wish we did, but we don't.
we just get this whole thing, right? And the more that we can learn to embrace the whole thing, somehow life, like that transaction you had with your dad, it's a timeless transaction. Could be, for a daughter to be able to give that gift of being present for. I wrote about this in the book. I've been present at the death of people back in my previous role as a pastor. I've sat through people's death, and I've sat with loved ones who cannot be present for it. Yeah. And it's just heartbreaking, because there's someone that's saying, I'm not, no, and you go, dude, stop saying no. This is happening. Mm-hmm. Like, you're not going to get to pick this, my friend. Like, this is what it is, right? And I don't know. There's something deeply diminishing about having to run away from that, And there's something extraordinarily ennobling about leaning into what life really is, which is the inclusion of all these things. You lean into what life really is, and it's all of this. And no one's, whether your thing is chronic disease or not, or whether it's depression, or whether it's the fact that you were born in a developing country, and or whether you're in Syria, or whether you're a young girl in Afghanistan now, and for the 18 years of your life you were going to go to school. Now the Taliban's back in, and you're at home now, terrified that if you go out to get an education, you're going to get abused, killed, some punishment, some form of punitive punishment. Like, this is the game. This is the game of life, right? Like, and it's not a game. I don't mean to trivialize it by calling it a game, but this is the mix. It's all of this stuff going on, and it's just not served. It should be held in reverence by saying, yeah, this is what, this kind of denial of needing to petition everything and say it's not. No, you just got to lean into what it is, and then be present for it and work through it, and then have that drive to improve, or that drive to alleviate a suffering, or have that drive to bring a justice, if a justice can be brought to a little girl's life, or to bring a healing if food can be brought to someone who's hungry. Or, I mean, this is the essence of true humanity, is like, if we can do something to improve someone, let's do that. If we can coalesce around a better thing, then let's do the better thing, right? But it's not served by some kind of singularity that says, I resent. Well, I get it. There's a lot of stuff to resent. But it's not going to progress anything, right? And so I think the adoption of some of these higher perspectives goes, okay, here's what we're playing with. Here's what's happening, and I'm not in control of that, but I can incorporate that. I mean, Kenny Wilbur always talks about transcend and include. I can transcend this thing, and I can include it, but you can't transcend and repudiate. It doesn't work.
No. Yeah, and I think that's beautiful. I think that's the big thing with at least my journey. It has deepened my humanity. You know, like that's definitely been the side effect of having MS. Is it's deepened my humanity for sure.
And what do we? I mean, it's a funny thing in early Christianity. It's like everyone's like, everyone was trying to be so saintly and so godly and so moral and so pure and so Christ-like. And you go, what are we here to do? I'm here to be fully human. I wasn't created an angel. I'm not an angel, I'm created a human. So, there was a part of waking up for me, which is like, I am meant to be fully human. And whatever deepens that humanity makes me as pure and as honest and as an integrous human I can be. Let's do that,
Yeah.
And that's never going to be served by not. It's never going to be served by rejecting stuff. It has to be served by finding meaning for what we're going through. And like I said, there's a sliding scale of meaning, and different people are at different levels. They shouldn't be judged or criticised for where they're at. But as we do evolve, I think it's true to say that we do evolve in terms of, and that means we're going to have to upgrade as our worldview shifts as we move through stages. We're going to have to upgrade our interpretation. That's the way I deal with that.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way I think about that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good conversation, and I feel like I know we didn't quite answer the question, but hopefully we've left enough breadcrumbs for people to be able to follow a trail to find what their own definition and meaning of why is, and at the very least, if not, to be able to reflect and go, okay, so maybe this thing that I'm experiencing in my life isn't all bad, and maybe I can go back and have a look at the blessings that it's brought. Because I think when you take a look from that perspective, and you can see that a diagnosis or a disease can't all be bad, it just doesn't function that way, that it just helps you to sit in a space of more connectedness and gratitude, and all of those emotions we know trigger healing anyway. So, being able to sit in there rather than in fear and things like that, you're just going to produce better chemistry in your body. So
beautiful. Totally agree.
Yeah.
It's nicely said.
Yeah. So thank you. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I just look. I feel for anyone who's out there going through some of the stuff that we've been talking about, and hearts with those people. And I know some of this will seem very esoteric and difficult, and maybe it is, but I just hope that you can find some comfort and find your way through to something that actually works for you, gives meaning and substance to what you're going through, and to know that your life is valuable, not because of what you're producing or what you're doing, but your life is extraordinarily important just in where it's at, not because of what we do, but just because of the phenomena of what it is. So,
yeah, beautifully said.
I believe that with all my heart.
I do too. And yeah, you might not be able to fulfill your purpose as prescribed by the outside world, but remember, you being you is your purpose. There's no greater purpose than that.
I think that's wonderful. Yeah. Totally.
Well, thank you for your time. I'm going to add a side note. If anyone's looking at my head, because I know if I was watching this, it would drive me insane to go, what is on her head? I saw the acupuncturist today, and I've had cranial acupuncture, and there's a little bad boy staying overnight. So if you're wondering what this thorny crown is, it's that. I digress. Thank you so much, Greg. I will put some links in below if you're interested in, I know for me, navigating all of this stuff, sometimes it's just good to have someone to talk to and reflect on. I'll put Greg's details down below where you can contact him if you need a spiritual mentor or guide. Greg is your man. I'll put a link to his website where you could order his book when he orders some more in there, but they're sold out. So you're shaking his head at me. Don't promote the book, Fiona.
Yeah, give him my email. That'll
done.
Contact me direct. I'm happy to talk. So.
All right, perfect. I'll do that. And just a reminder that if you like the content that we produce, hit subscribe. You'll get notified anytime we put out a new video. If you enjoyed this, give us a like just to let YouTube know that this kind of content is good. We always appreciate it. And if you have any comments, or if you want to get Greg back next time to talk about something else, put something in the comments section. I do read those, and we will definitely have a look at those. There's the man is a wealth of knowledge. There's so many different things that we could talk about. So if there's anything that you want him to put his amazing brain to, let us know. Thank you again for being part of our tribe. If you want to know more about Kidney Coach, head across to kidneycoach.com. And on there, you'll find all about our products and our ebooks, and you'll be able to contact the amazing naturopaths there if you've got any questions. All right, gang, thank you so much. Greg, again, thank you for these amazing conversations. You know how much I enjoy them. And we'll see you all next time. Au revoir. Bye.